Shalom Aleichem on page 49.
Shalom Aleichem, Malchei Hasharet, Malachei Yom, Melech, Malchei Hamlachim, Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Bochem Shalom, Malchei Hashalom. Kadosh Baruch Hu. Machoni leshalom, Malchei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech, Malchei Hamlachim, Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Shalom, Malchei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech, Malchei Hamlachim, Hakadosh Baruch Hu.
As we welcome in the Shabbat angels, I want to welcome all of you tuning in from all across DC, all across the country, all across the world. I don't know where you're tuning in from. Shabbat Shalom. We're going to, together over the course of the next hour or so, help to bring in Shabbat, even though the sun has long set. I don't know about you. I'm still like every year, it's like, oh my, it gets dark so early. And I think a lot of people's hearts and minds this Shabbat are probably on Thanksgiving, the upcoming holiday in just a couple of days. This is the last Shabbat, of course, before Thanksgiving, and I know that that is causing a fair amount of stress for a fair amount of people, myself included. A lot of worry. Should I see my family? Should I not see my family? Cancel plans, not cancel plans. Worry about our health, our family's health. So you don't need me to tell you that it's a crazy time right now, but it is a crazy time right now. And you definitely don't need me weighing in on like what you should do with your Thanksgiving plans. That's like not stress you need, and I don't know. All I know is I'm sure whatever you decide, that it is a thoughtful and careful decision. And in the absence of sort of any larger leadership on COVID, you're certainly doing the best you can. But I guess I'd like to humbly request all that anxiety about these upcoming plans, and we haven't even gotten into the anxiety around actually seeing your family, which is a whole separate set of issues. Let's just try to put that aside for the next hour, just sort of slow down a little bit, get in touch with ourselves, and just start to be a little more present, notice what's around us, and trust that in 24 hours, all those anxieties can come flooding right back in, and we can deal with those issues then. Shabbat's a time to just be as present as we can, to get out of our heads, and to connect to ourselves and one another. We begin the Kabbalat Shabbat service with Yedid Nefesh, a love poem. Tonight is Good Soul, which means we're going to do the full Kabbalat Shabbat service with no Mariv. So for those of you who are new to a Friday night service, we're going to focus on just the first half, Kavod Shabbat, which consists of a variety of psalms that helps us reflect on the week. But first, we sing a love poem, which can be found on page 3 and begins with the words, Yedid Nefesh.
Yedid Nefesh Avrachaman, Yedid Nefesh Avrachaman, Mishach Avdecha, Eretz Onecha, Mishach Avdecha, Eretz Onecha, Yarutz Avdecha,
The first psalm of the Kavod Shabbat service is Psalm 95, which can be found on the top of page 4. Over the course of the next few minutes, we will be going through a collection of 6 psalms, and those 6 psalms, of course, correspond with the 6 days of the week. So I invite you all to begin to reflect, going all the way back to Sunday, what transpired this week, what were moments where you felt most alive, moments where you struggled. As we cultivate this inner reflectiveness, we also, in doing so, cultivate a sense of spirituality and a connection to our souls. Top of page 4.
Lecho neranena, lecho neranena, lecho neranena l'Adonai. Lecho neranena, lecho neranena, lecho neranena l'Adonai. Ria Esuri Shenu, Nekama Vanatoda, 40 שנה אקוט בדור והעומרם טועה לבבם 40 שנה אקוט בדור והעומרם טועה לבבם והם לא ידעו דרכם והם לא ידעו דרכם והם לא ידעו דרכם והם לא ידעו דרכם אשר נשבעתי באבי אם יבואו אל מנוחתי אשר נשבעתי באבי אם יבואו אל מנוחתי
We turn to the top of page 5 for the next psalm, Psalm 96, which begins with the words, Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash, sing to God a new song. And of course, there's an irony in singing an old song and calling it a new song. But as we read in this week's Torah portion, Isaac, Abraham's son, went around throughout the ancient land of Israel digging up the wells of his father. And there's something about redigging up that which we've inherited and claiming it as our own. Join us on the top of page 5.
שירו לאדוני שיר חדש שירו לאדוני כל הארץ שירו לאדוני ברכו שמו מסרו מיום ליום ישועתו ספרו הגויים כעבודו בכל העמים נגלותם כי גדול
you think we would have gotten up and danced if everyone was here on that one?
Yes.
Right? I was feeling that vibe. Maybe not, though. Sort of like, if everyone was here, they would love everything I'm saying. We turn to Psalm 97, which can be found towards the top of page 6. And even if you aren't familiar with these tunes, if you're new to these words, just the fact that you've shown up, that you've logged on, that you are sort of letting these tunes wash over you, eventually you might actually learn them, but what matters more is just that you let them wash over you and sort of let them pluck the strings of your soul. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that makes sense. Join us together on the top of page 6. Adonai mahalach tagel haaret yismachu im rabim.
Shines for the righteous, a true heart with a joyous heart. Light shines for the righteous, a true heart with a joyous heart. Oh, Zaruah, Latzadik. We continue moving on to Psalm 98, which can be found in the middle of page 7. יזמור שיר לאדוני שיר חדש, כי נפלאות עשה הושיע לו, ימינו וזרוע קודשו.
Bottom of page 7.
ירם הים ומלוא,
Yiram hayam umelo,
ירם הים ומלוא,
Yiram hayam umelo,
תבל ויושבי בה, ירם הים ומלוא, ירם הים ומלוא,
Yiram hayam umelo,
ירם הים ומלוא,
Yiram hayam umelo,
תבל ויושבי בה, ירם הים ומלוא. נהרות ימך תמחאוך יחררים ירננו ירם הים ומלוא
Yiram hayam umelo.
ירם הים ומלוא
Yiram hayam umelo.
תבל ויושבבה ירם הים ומלוא ירם הים ומלוא
Yiram hayam umelo.
ירם הים ומלוא
Yiram hayam umelo.
תבל ויושבבה ירם הים ומלוא נהרות ימחאוך יחררים ירננו נהרות ימחאוך יחררים ירננו נהרות ימחאוך יחררים ירננו נהרות ימחאוך יחררים ירננו ירם הים ומלוא
Yiram hayam umelo.
ירם הים ומלוא
Yiram hayam umelo.
תבל ויושבבה ירם הים ומלוא
We turn to the middle of page 8 as we progress to Psalm 99, again making our way through the 6 Psalms and hopefully also through the 6 days of the week that have transpired. This week included Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the new month of Kislev. And so even though it's dark out and the darkness is growing, we're moving closer towards the darkest day of the year, there is hope because in the month of Kislev, of course, is also the holiday, the 8-day-long holiday of Hanukkah, where we remember that a little light dispels a lot of darkness. Join us in the middle of page 8.
אדוני מלך כי יגזו עמים, יושב קרובים, תנו את הארץ. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו לקודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו לקודשו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו לקודשו.
If you are able, please rise as we turn to page 9, Psalm 29, the 6th Psalm of the Kabbalat Shabbat service. We begin with the words Mizmor LeDavid. we've reflected on the past 6 days, we're finally ready to accept Shabbat, to bring Shabbat into our homes. But first, a quick little mystical prayer called Ana B'Koach, which can be found on page 10. Before we turn to page 11 for the official Lecha Dodi prayer where we welcome in Shabbat, I'll share a few words, also known as a sermon. So it being the Shabbat before Thanksgiving, I thought I'd touch on a stereotypical aspect of Thanksgiving, which is, of course, the annual tradition of fighting over politics at the Thanksgiving table. Because even if you don't end up seeing your family this Thanksgiving, and even if somehow your entire family is magically politically aligned, the problem of political disagreements in this country is, well, it's probably not going anywhere. Here in D.C., which voted over 94% for President-elect Biden, it's a little easy to conveniently ignore the fact that over 73 million Americans voted for Donald Trump. So without negating the joy or the relief or the hope that many of you might have felt when the election was called, I'm sadly here to remind you that we are a deeply divided country, which makes the opening image of this week's Torah portion, Parshat Toldot, especially poignant. Two children wrestling inside of Rebekah's womb. The struggle is so intense, it sparks an existential struggle within Rebekah herself. If this is so, why do I exist? She asks herself. God leaves this question unanswered, but does give Rebekah some insight into what's going on inside of her. 2 nations are in your womb. 2 separate people shall issue from your body. One shall be mightier than the other. 2 separate people locked in battle. Rashi, drawing on the Talmud, reads a zero-sum element into this struggle. He writes, they will never be equally great at the same time. When one rises, the other must fall. And while the text itself doesn't place any moral judgment on these 2 children, our rabbis read into this story 2 opposite ends of the moral spectrum, transforming it into a mythic battle between good and evil. So is this the image of our country right now? 2 sides, one good, one evil, depending on who you ask, battling it out for power. One side rising, the other falling. Are we just going to keep playing this game every 2 years? Enter the Degel Machane Ephraim, the grandson of the founder of the Hasidic movement, himself a Hasidic Rebbe, with a very different interpretation of these events, with resonances for us in America in 2020. He understands these 2 struggling twins in Rebekah's womb as a metaphor for 2 competing drives within ourselves, a good, or what I'd call a constructive drive, and a bad, or what I'd call a destructive drive. The Degel Machane Ephraim is focused less on the external struggles out there and more on the internal struggle happening in here. That's a radical new take on a story that for centuries was interpreted as about the good guys versus the bad guys. It's easier, in a way, to fight the bad guys that are, over there. Then I don't have to confront my own darkness. I can stay perfectly pure and good in my own mind. I think Donald Trump has helped us hold on to this illusion of ourselves as perfectly good these past 4 years. I mean, I'm nothing like him. And if he's terrible, then I'm great. We're locked in this zero-sum battle between good and evil, 2 people fighting it out, just like the standard interpretation of this week's Torah portion. But the thing is that we know deep down that we aren't purely good or purely bad. We have both of these aspects within ourselves, and the Degel Machane Ephraim wants us to embrace that reality. So does the spiritual activist and thinker Parker Palmer, who writes in his book, The Active Life, our most constructive impulse is often accompanied by a destructive impulse, made all the more destructive by the fact that we usually remain oblivious to this sinister energy within us, a force that can be held off for a while, but that will assert itself all the more vigorously the longer that it's pushed aside. Both the Degel Machane Ephraim and Parker Palmer, a couple hundred years later, are pushing us to confront the wholeness of our inner lives, both our constructive and our destructive nature. Why? Why is this so important to both of them? Well, I'd like to suggest that addressing this disunity within ourselves, this splitting off, is the critical first step in addressing the disunity that is around us. Because the lines between out there and in here, they're not as stark as we think. In fact, they might not even exist at all. Come along on this metaphysical journey with me. The Abarbanel, who's a 15th century Portuguese Jewish philosopher, he addresses this idea of out there and in here, and he writes, what happens in the broad world also happens to a particular individual. Therefore, in Judaism, the whole world is likened to a single person. So much so that we call an individual person a mini world, an olam katan. And we also call the world a macro person. According to the Abarbanel, the larger world and our inner world are actually reflections of one another. So if there's polarization, disconnection, disunity out there, that's probably a symptom of that same thing happening inside of us. Now, I'm definitely not saying that if we get in touch with our destructive impulse, then magically this country is going to get healed. For sure not. But I am suggesting that this might be a good place to start. But here's the problem. If those lines are blurred, then that means the following scary sentence. Donald Trump is in all of us. Hopefully not to the same degree, but we all contain elements of the things that we hate in him. And so the more that we can blur our lines between self and other, internal and external, the more equipped I think we will be to heal. This idea is perhaps best conveyed through a Hasidic story that I had heard and spent some time tracking down, and thank you to a bunch of rabbis on a listserv who helped me track this down. It comes from the second Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Dov Ber Shneuri, who was living towards the end of the 18th century, the beginning of the 19th century. As backstory, just the only important thing to note is that in Chabad, there's this tradition called Yechidus, which is individual congregants would have one-on-one private time with their Rebbe. So one day, in the middle of a long line of people waiting for a Yechidus with the Rebbe, he stops the line, locks the door, and refuses to receive any more people. So days later, after that instance, one of the more brave Hasidim, one of the followers of the Rebbe, says, "What happened there?" And Rabbi Dov Ber responded as follows. He said, "Every day I see people who come to me for help, who want me to help heal their problems. And for me, the first step always is identifying within myself the problem that they have that they want me to help with. Because, and this is fairly obvious once you say it out loud, I can't help someone if I can't identify that within myself, if I haven't gone on a similar journey myself." And so what happened that one day was that someone had come to me and I couldn't find within myself that problem which had been brought to me, but I knew that it was deep within me, and so I needed that extra time in order to locate it within myself before I could help them. The second Lubavitcher Rebbe is teaching us a profound truth, I think, that the first step towards healing is in identification with the other, with the problem, with that which we perceive is outside of ourself. I know, but Trump in me? It's easy to dismiss those people out there, but internal disunity is a lot harder to withstand. And I think that's exactly the point. If we can see ourselves in them and them in ourselves, then we can begin the holy work of unification, which according to philosopher Martin Buber is actually the entire purpose of Judaism. He writes, "This has always been and will continue to be Judaism's significance for humanity, that it confronts humanity with the demand for unity, a unity born out of one's duality and the redemption from it." Okay, so that's a tall order. How do we begin this inner work of embracing our shadow selves and working towards building a unity within and without? Well, it's going to take some time. Probably not going to have this figured out by Thanksgiving. But I think it starts by understanding that all of these pieces of ourselves, they're all part of God's providence plan. The Degel Machane Ephraim, the one who upended our story from this week's Torah portion, he continues in his commentary, This is the purpose of the creation of humanity. And whenever a Hasidic rabbi says something like that, you're going to really want to pay attention. So he says, this is the purpose, that a person should try to make a destructive drive into a creative or constructive drive. That is, to worship God from all matters, even those parts of our destructive side. And then he quotes from a famous line in Ethics of Our Ancestors, who is wise? That person who learns from everyone. And so then he quotes another Hasidic rabbi and says, who learns from everyone and everything, even our own destructive force. And then he quotes Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, the one no less than the other was God's doing. It would take a full hour to unpack all the deep knowledge that he just dropped, but I want to highlight just this one point this evening. For the Degel Machne Ephraim, both drives within us are divine, and we can learn from both, from all of it. Amazingly, Parker Palmer shares a similar idea. He says, God surely must embody the paradox of destruction and creativity. By acknowledging this paradox in God, we are better able to penetrate the common illusion of our own niceness, better able to touch the complex reality of our own nature and the nature in which we are embedded. At the heart of reality, we and God together are stretched by the creative tension between death and life, between ourselves, tug sometimes this way and sometimes that. Like God, we contain immense potential for creation and destruction. The more honest we are with ourselves about our full, complex selves, the more we can start to see the divinity within all of that. This takes a lot of work, but I'm hopeful, if not for the country, then at least for ourselves and our community, that we might start to crack ever so slightly the walls that we have built up between ourselves. If we can see our struggles in their struggles, perhaps we can struggle together instead of opposed to one another. If we can see our darkness in their darkness, perhaps together we can seek out the light. Shabbat Shalom. Now we can finally welcome in Shabbat with a prayer known as Lecha Dodi, come my beloved, let us greet the Sabbath bride. It can be found on page 11 and page 12. Together we'll do verses 1, 2, 5, and 9. We'll pause before 9 where I'll invite you if you're able to rise. But join us now at the top of page 11.
Shabbat, lechu v'necha, ki
סוף מעשה ומחשבה תחילה. הולך אדוני לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. הולך אדוני לקראת קהלה, פני שבת, פני שבת נקבלה. דודי לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורך קומי אורי, 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 שיר דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה. לך דודי לקראת קהלה, לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קהלה, לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. If you're able, please rise and face your door, some door, to symbolically greet the Shabbat bride. Verse 9 at the bottom of page 12.
בואי ושלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ולצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה. לך דודי לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קהלה, לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קהלה, לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קהלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קהלה, פני
You may be seated as we turn to page 13 for our seventh psalm, Psalm 92, a psalm specifically written for Shabbat. We'll do the beginning and the end together. Mizmor shir, leyom hashabat. Mizmor shir, leyom hashabat. Tov lehodot l'Adonai uzamer, leshimcha elyon lehagid. Vavoker chasdecha, v'emunatecha v'alelo. top of page 14.
Tzadikata ha'yifrach keheres balvanon yiskeh shetulim beveit Adonai vechatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu od yenuvun miseheva deshenim verananim yehiu lehagi ki yashar Adonai turi velo havlatavo.
And finally, 1/8 Psalm 8, representing beyond perfection, transcendence in Judaism, Psalm 93 on the middle of page 14.
Adonai malach gehut lavesh Adonai oz hitazah ahavtiko tevel valtimo nachon kisacham eyaz me'olam atan nasu ne'arot Adonai nasu ne'arot golam yisu ne'arot dochya mikolot mayim rabim adirim mishmereyam adir b'amarom Adonai edotecha nemnu me'od leveitcha navakodesh Adonai leorech yamim la 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 hayya la 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 hayya la 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 hayya la 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 hayya la 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 hayya la 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 hayya la la hayya la 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 hayya la 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 la
We turn to page 23 for the Vishamru prayer, which is a few verses taken directly out of the Torah, reminding us that this practice of Shabbat, it really is quite ancient. Top of page 23.
Shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדורתם ולגדולם ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם
We turn back to page 15 for Mourner's Kaddish. If you've lost a loved one in this last year, or if you're commemorating the yahrzeit, the passing of a loved one, or if you would just like to stand in solidarity with those who have lost a loved one, you're invited to rise if you're able and join me on page 15. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach hirutei ve'amlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chay d'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala v'zman kariv ve'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam olmei olmaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitshomam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei d'kudusha b'richu, le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiran be'alma ve'imru amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya v'chaim, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru amen. You may be seated. We'll conclude with a prayer for peace, but before we do, a few quick thank yous to this holy musical team. They really are the best. I hope that is conveyed through this screen, but maybe you have to be here, but man, they are so talented. Aaron, Jeff, Sarah, thank you so much. And of course to the people who made this happen on the back end, Colin, Mark, Layla, thank you so much. We're off. Six and I is out of office the whole next week, which is really awesome for me. I'm sorry to rub that in. But we will see you back virtually at some point in the very near future. Thanks for tuning in tonight, and Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Oseh Shalom can be found on the bottom of page 15.
Oseh Shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru Israel.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend and a healthy and safe Thanksgiving as well. Thanks for joining us.
Well, no, sorry, no. I mean, I think you had the right call.
I didn't know you messed up when I saw that.
Jeff is like, and we are done.
I'm out of here. I'm hungry.